Welcome to the Midnight Dreary, your rest stop on the highway of the unexplained. Pull up a bar stool and grab a drink as we present tonight's episode. And here's your host, Justin Wood.
Welcome back, Midnight Dreary fans. I am your host, Justin Wood, and guess what? We are kicking off the 2025 spooky season. This is the first podcast of the season. I have a great episode for you tonight. Before we get into that, though, if you are new to the channel, first and foremost, welcome. Lots of good content, lots of old episodes to check out, but please like, subscribe, follow on whatever podcasting platform you may be listening to. That means a lot to me. And if you have any ideas for content, I'm still making some episodes for this season. If you have an idea for me, either a story to read, a real tale you want to hear about, dark history you'd like to learn more about, shoot me an email, themidnightdreary@yahoo.com. Also, this year I'm proud to say I released a third edition of my book. It's 15 ghost stories plus a bonus tale. It's called Needless Nightmares. If you go to Amazon, type in Needless Nightmares, it should pull right up. It's an ebook format this time. That was fun trying to get that format down, but I did it. We did it. So if you prefer a Kindle or e-reader, your iPad, that may be for you, but it also is a paperback as well. So get that on Amazon. Perfect for Halloween season 2025. Needless Nightmares on Amazon. And let's start tonight's episode. Tonight's story, this is some dark history. It's about two men who stalked the wilderness roads of Tennessee and Kentucky at the turn of the 19th century. They murdered for profit, but they mostly murdered for pleasure. And when they were finally stopped, history infamously remembers their names. This is the tale of Micajah and Wiley Harpe, known to history as Big Harpe and Little Harpe. That's quite a name. You don't hear names like Micajah anymore, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Micajah, but better known and how we're going to refer to them as Big Harpe and Little Harpe. Now, are they America's first serial killers? Perhaps, and most likely they were. Certainly they were really infamous in the frontier era. Criminologists define a serial killer as someone who commits 3 or more separate murders, and we'll see that they certainly did that, usually over a period of time with a cooling off period between the crimes. What sets them apart isn't just the number, but the pattern. Repeated killings driven by compulsion rather than necessity. And again, we'll see that in this episode. By that standard, the Harpes fit the mold. They murdered not in a single frenzy, but again and again across Tennessee and Kentucky, leaving bodies scattered across the roads and rivers. Their motives were rarely theft or gain. More often it just seemed like bloodlust. And a warning, before we get deep into the episode, there's some disturbing violence in here, including against children, so listener discretion is strongly advised in this episode. So let's get to the beginning. The Harpes' beginnings are a tangle of rumor, record, and folklore, because I've seen mostly they're listed as brothers, but I've seen some accounts say they're cousins, and some accounts say they were born in North Carolina to Scottish immigrants in the 1760s. Others insist they were sons of loyalists during the American Revolution fighting against the Patriot cause. In either case, violence surrounded them from an early age. Raids, skirmishes, burned farms, blood feuds. The backcountry was no place for innocence. The Tennessee Encyclopedia places them squarely in the frontier South by the 1790s. Micajah Harpe, Big Harpe, let's go with that one because I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, was described in period accounts as an unusually large man for his time. He was around 6 foot tall, broad-shouldered, and heavy-set. In the late 18th century, when the average man stood closer to 5'7", his size alone would make him an imposing figure. Wiley, or Little Harpe, was smaller and leaner, with a wiry build that contrasted his brother's bulk. Together they cut a striking pair, one towering and powerful, the other quick and sharp. Big Harpe and Little Harpe. We're going to go with brothers. That seems to be the most reported relationship between them. And again, sticking with Big Harpe and Little Harpe. Contemporaries often remarked on the brothers' closeness. They were rarely seen apart, and many suggested that Wiley followed Micajah's lead. I'm lying, I keep going back to their names. Acting as his shadow in both daily life and in violence. Others noted that their bond seemed less like ordinary brotherhood, more like a partnership, one that was forged in brutality. Where Big Harpe's strength made him feared, Little Harpe's cunning made them dangerous, and together they created a reputation that spread terror across the backcountry. A Knox County marriage bond survives from 1797, recording Wiley Little Harpe marrying Sarah Rice, with Micajah Big Harpe signing beside him as a co-bondsman. Just ink on paper, two men bound by law, yet within a year they would be only bound by blood. The common history also records that they both took wives, likely sisters, and contends that the wives were more captives than actual companions to the duo. Some inconsistency on that. Some say the wives were just wives to the guys, and some say they were more, again, captives to them. Now, by the late 1790s, travelers began disappearing in this area. We're talking Tennessee and Kentucky. Families murdered in their cabins. Men were vanishing along forest roads. Again, we're at the end of the 1700s, slowly creeping into the 1800s. There's not a huge population in frontier country, so when somebody goes missing, it gets around the frontier gossip pretty quick. And I think that's important. Let's talk about backcountry living for a moment. This is post-Revolutionary War. There's still a lot of, bad blood between the loyalists and the revolutionaries. So it's a raw and lonely country out there, and it's tough. Don't be blinded by the modern conveniences that we have. You have a country that's in its infancy, only 20 years prior, and when you go south, it's wide open land. It's raw, it's lonely. The Harpes roamed an America that was still more wilderness than nation. Kentucky and Tennessee especially, they were patchworks of crude settlements, scattered cabins, rough-hewn trails that barely counted as roads. Families lived in isolation, sometimes miles from the nearest neighbor. Cabins ringed by endless forests surrounding them. If you heard the sound of an axe, a gunshot, it carried for miles, but could it be trouble, or could it be somebody cutting wood? Could it be somebody hunting? You never knew, and even if you did, realistically, what could you do? Danger was everywhere. Native nations still were fighting fiercely to defend their land as waves of settlers began to push south and west. Wild animals prowled the woods. Bandits, drifters, they preyed on travelers who carried their lives and their fortunes in wagons and flatboats. For many, the frontier was opportunity. For others, it was a lawless ground where the strong or the ruthless could take what they pleased. And the Harpes, these two menaced brothers, they were ruthless. They were strong. And they preyed on people. And what was strange, by most accounts, they didn't really take for profit that much. It was sheer desire to murder people. In 1798, a man named Johnson was found floating in the Holston River, his body weighted with stones, his stomach slit and stuffed to keep him from surfacing. Locals whispered the Harpes' names. Another account tells of a peddler who vanished after sharing a fire with them. The next morning, only his blood was found spattered next to the dying fire ring. Numbers began to grow. Some sources, often newspapers eager for a tale, claimed the Harpes murdered 39 people. Others thought the count far higher. In truth, no one knows, but even the confirmed deaths painted a portrait of cruelty. And then came Webster County, Kentucky. It was the summer of 1799, and Moses Stagel was away from home when the Harpes came to his cabin near present-day Webster County, Kentucky. By all accounts, they asked for food and lodging, a common request on the frontier where hospitality often meant survival. But when Stagel returned, he walked into a nightmare. His wife lay murdered. His infant child was gone. The details that survive are chilling. One account, grim but most often repeated, says that Big Harpe, angered by the baby's crying, seized the child by the heels and dashed its head against the cabin wall. Even in an age hardened by war, raids, and backcountry violence, the deliberate killing of a woman and an infant was unthinkable. News spread quickly through the sparse settlements. The frontier had tolerated bandits and bushwhackers before, but this crime crossed a line that no community could ignore. Neighbors and travelers alike began to see the Harpes not just as criminals, but as monsters. Fear turned to rage. Moses Stegall, devastated by the loss of his family, swore vengeance. He joined forces with a man named John Leeper and other determined settlers to form a posse. In the cane brakes and backwoods of Kentucky, they set out to hunt the Harpes down, not simply to bring them justice, but to erase them from the earth. On August 24th, 1799, the long hunt came to a close. Moses Stegall, John Leeper, and their posse caught up to the Harpes near Dixon, Kentucky. The outlaws tried to flee through the dense cane brakes, but Big Harpe's great size betrayed him. A musket ball struck him down, and he was dragged bleeding from his horse. As he lay on the ground, torn open and fading fast, witnesses claimed he made a startling confession. Between ragged breaths, he is said to have admitted to killing more than 20 people. Now, whether that was a boast, an attempt at infamy, or even the truth, no one could say, but for those who heard it, it was confirmation that they were in the presence of a man who had become something less than human. The posse might have just let his wounds finish the work, but not Moses Stegall. Moses Stegall rage demanded more. Here was a man who had his wife murdered, his infant child dashed against a wall, and now he has the killer. For Stegall, quick death would be justice. He's not going to have that. He wanted to be a slow and deliberate death. He took his knife and he severed Big Harpe's head slowly from his body. The gruesome trophy was carried to a nearby crossroads mounted high upon a pole where all who passed it would see it. Travelers would glance up at the weathered face, lips drawn back in a final grimace, and know the fate of murderers on the frontier. The site became known as Harpe's Head, later Harpe's Hill, a name that lingers in local memory even 2 centuries later. A Kentucky historical marker still stands today, recalling that moment of frontier justice. I looked it up. There is a marker up there, and I believe it's still called it's actually called Harpe's Heads Road still, up in Kentucky. Look it up. So Big Harpe, that's the end of him. Big Harpe's story ended in that dust on that Kentucky road. Justice for a widowed father who lost his child and his wife at the hands of Big Harpe. And it ended on that road with him losing his head. What happened to Little Harpe, though? His trail of blood and terror would continue on for a little bit. So after Big Harpe's death, Wiley, Little Harpe, slipped away into the wilderness. For months and maybe even years, he vanished from the frontier trails that had once carried whispers of his crimes. But he did not reform. He resurfaced later in a place that was already notorious, Cave-In Rock. The cavern sits high above the Illinois side of the Ohio River, a yawning limestone mouth that had long been a gathering point for bandits, counterfeiters, and killers. By the early 1800s, it was ruled by Samuel Mason, a former Revolutionary War officer turned river pirate. His gang preyed on the lifeblood of the frontier, flatboats loaded with settlers and their belongings, drifting slowly down the Ohio towards new homes in Kentucky, Tennessee, and even beyond. Families floated into the darkness of the cave, lured with promises of hospitality, only to be robbed, beaten, and sometimes murdered. It was among those outlaws that Wiley Harpe, now calling himself John Sutton, let the Harpe name put him away, so now we have John Sutton. I wonder if he went by Little John Sutton. He found shelter there in Cave-In Rock. For a time, he survived in their company, blending his own taste for violence with the cutthroat opportunism of Mason's men. But the frontier was shrinking, and even the wilderness had limits. In 1803, Mason himself was captured by Spanish authorities near the Mississippi. He escaped custody, but was soon hunted with a price on his head, dead or alive. Wiley saw his chance. Alongside another outlaw, Peter Austin, he brought in Mason's severed head, claiming they had killed the infamous pirate and demanding the reward. But frontier justice was fickle, and the lawmen who examined the trophy recognized the men standing before them. This was not John Sutton. He was not a Sutton at all. It was Wiley Harpe, the last of the dreaded brothers. Instead of payment in silver, Wiley earned a cell and a rope. In January of 1804, he was hanged in the Mississippi Territory. No monument was raised for him, no marker placed at his grave. His brother's head rotted on a pole in Kentucky, and his own body swung at the end of a noose. And with that, the Harpe brothers were gone. But the terror they spread lived on in memory and legend. I wonder if Wiley has a road named after him. If not, He's an infamous outlaw, but it's 2 centuries later. Do we name a road after the younger Harpe brother or Little Harpe? I don't know. Maybe we'll put that. Maybe the municipality will put that up for a vote at their city council meeting. What am I saying? They have more pressing issues than naming roads after long dead pirate brothers. All right. So, brass tacks. How many people did the Harpes really kill? Historians tend to divide this into 3 groups: the confirmed, the confessed, and the legendary, which is blended into folklore. So let's look at the confirmed murders, the ones we can reasonably tie to them through records or consistent reports. All right, number 1, a man named Johnson, found in the Holston River, his body cut open and stuffed with stones. Langford, a traveler on the Kentucky Wilderness Road, murdered after a quarrel. An unnamed peddler who disappeared after camping with them. At least 2 travelers near Knoxville killed along the road. A settler named Hardin, also murdered near Knoxville. A young boy, Coffee, killed in Kentucky. And the most infamous of all, Miss Stegall and her infant child, brutally murdered in the summer of 1799. So altogether, that's at least 8 to 10 deaths we can lay at their feet with a pretty high degree of confidence. And, going back to what defines a serial killer, I would certainly say they meet that standard. Now, next, the confessed number. Remember, when Big Harpe was mortally wounded and he was dragged from his horse, he supposedly admitted to killing 20 people. There's consistent reports saying he had that, I don't think a deathbed confession because he's laying on the ground near a horse, but a before he died confession, he admitted to killing 20 people. Now, whether that was truth or bravado, we'll never know. I lean more towards truth because, again, we talked about the wilderness. Even though that frontier gossip was there and there was not a large population, the record keeping also was still really infant in this country. So if you had a lone traveler that nobody really knew about, maybe he wasn't on a census, maybe it was a recent immigrant, maybe it was a soldier from the war that wasn't documented, a mercenary, and the Harpes got him. So the 20 to me seems like it could be true. And I'm also curious if Big Harpe was more of the murderer and Little Harpe, Wiley, was more of the brains or the plans behind it. It seems like Big Harpe had more of the attitude, and he's confessing to the murders right before he dies. Let's talk about the legendary number. 19th century writers always repeated a tally of 39 murders, and that figure has echoed through folklore ever since. That's almost certainly exaggerated. Some of those deaths were likely the work of outlaws, but that 39 number has stuck. Maybe it embellishes them into further infamous legends. But writers stuck with the 39 number and likely attributed some deaths in some other areas to the brothers, but they weren't well known if they had even been in those areas. So depending on who you believe, the Harpes killed, we can say bare minimum 8 people, maybe 10, with a degree of pretty good accuracy. Big Harpe's confession says 20, 39 is likely exaggerated. I tend to believe towards 20. It just seems weird if he's passing away. The witnesses say that's what his confession was. I don't know if he's just throwing a figure out. Why would he? Just to confuse them as they're about to chop his head off. All right, so likely 20. Let's go with that number. All right, let's talk about their legacy. More than 2 centuries later, we're talking about them on a podcast, the Harpes remain part of the landscape, both in American history and in memory. And like I said, if you go to Webster County, Kentucky, you can still find Harp's Head Road. I knew I'd written that down. Named for the very spot where Micajah's Big Harpe's decapitated head once stared down travelers from a pole. A modern historical marker stands nearby, retelling the story of his gruesome end. Along the Ohio River, visitors can walk into Cave-In Rock, the cavern where Wiley hid among the pirates and the cutthroats. It's now part of an Illinois state park. Quiet today, but its dark interior still whispers of the outlaws who once ruled in its shadows. If you're looking for a grave, you're not going to find one. Neither brother has a marked burial site. Big Harpe's body was left where he fell and his head was displayed as a warning. Wiley swung from the gallows in the Mississippi Territory and was buried in an unmarked grave. In death, as in life, they remained unsettled. Folklore did the rest. Some remembered them as men possessed, cursed to kill without reason. Others painted them as devils in human form. Over time, their names appeared in literature, ballads, even popular culture, not as outlaws chasing fortune, but as monsters who turned the open road into a place of terror. Were they America's first serial killers? Some historians say yes. The host of this podcast would agree. Others argue they were simply bandits who killed too freely. But whether you called them killers, outlaws, or devils, the Harpe brothers left a legacy written in blood, one that still haunts the backcountry they once prowled. And that is the story of the Harpe brothers. And as we close down the Midnight Dreary Tavern and you head home, stay safe on the back roads.
Thanks for stopping by the Midnight Dreary. We'll be open again next week to serve up more drinks and more mysteries. Until then, safe travels.